So, toward the end of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry is quite literally walking to his death. Despite being the baby who inadvertently ended Lord Voldemort's first reign of terror, and despite spending the last 7 years of his life fighting against Voldemort and his minions, Harry has learned that before Voldemort can be killed for good, Harry must die at Voldemort's hand. In order to spare his friends further pain and death, Harry immediately sets out for Voldemort's camp. But as he approaches, he finds his resolve wavering. To restore his courage, he takes the artifact called the Resurrection Stone, and after turning it over in his hand, he is joined by his parents, who died trying to protect him as an infant, and his father's two best friends, who died fighting alongside Harry. These are not ghosts or figures of his imagination, but they seem more like living memories. During their conversation, Harry's godfather simply says that we are a part of you. They show neither pain over their deaths nor frustration over lost time. And upheld by their loving presence, Harry is able to keep putting one foot in front of the other and meet his destiny. John, who wrote the book of Revelation, likewise had his vision of the dead while approaching his own death. According to church tradition, John was a victim of the persecution under the Emperor Domitian, who cracked down on those who would not acknowledge the Roman gods and worship the emperor. After God delivered John from what should have been his public execution, he was exiled to the small Greek island of Patmos, where more natural causes were expected to kill him sooner than later. Much of the revelation to John reads like a revenge fantasy, with deeply symbolic descriptions of the Roman persecution, followed by similarly symbolic visions of God laying the smackdown on the persecutors and all forces of evil, casting them forever into the lake of fire. But in the midst of these hyper-violent tribulations, John offers us several glimpses of the heaven that awaits those who remain faithful in the face of persecution, of which today's reading remains my favorite. The previous chapter describes the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God, crying out to God for judgment. And in this vision, that judgment has been rendered. They stand as a multitude before the throne of God, singing praises. The blood of the Lamb has washed away the blood of their martyrdom, and now that they are clean, they worship in the full presence of God. As they did in life, they ascribe glory, wisdom, honor, power, and might to God rather than to the emperor. And God, rather than the emperor, provides them with the sustenance, protection, and comfort that they need. And of particular note is the composition of this multitude. The countless throng before the throne is drawn from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages. God's salvation extends not just to Israel and not just to Gentiles of Greco-Roman stock, but to any and all who confess the faith of Christ crucified. What they have in common is not their cultural heritage or skin color, but their nonconformity to the demands of earthly empire. These are the ones who actively resisted evil and injustice, and who suffered and died for doing so. These are the ones who did what they could to bring earth closer to heaven, trusting that God would bring them to heaven when the folks who benefit from earth remaining just as it is push back against them. God's salvation is not limited to those who resisted Roman emperors, but extends across time. In the previous chapter, the souls crying out are told that their number is not yet complete. Within this multitude are some who died long before others were born. But here all of them are, singing to God day and night. This is the communion of saints above. And looking at that multitude, there are some who stand out for me. Thomas Becket, the king's friend who was martyred for refusing to let the king have his way with the church. Augustine of Hippo, whose conversion reminds me that seeking the truth is a virtue and never changing my mind is not. Dunstan, who when confronted by the devil literally seized him and threw him out. John Donne, whose poems I love and to whose quality of preaching I aspire. Francis of Assisi, whose stubborn commitment to poverty frequently nettles my conscience. And you, I'm sure, have your own saints, those famous forebears in the faith who inspire and challenge you to live fully into your baptismal vows. But the multitude around the throne also contains faces that I recognize, those who personally taught me about Jesus and whose love showed me what it means to love. Evelyn, John, Clary, the rest who might appear if I could turn over the resurrection stone like Harry Potter, because they are, in some small way, a part of me, and they uphold me when it looks like I'm following Jesus into conflict with the powers of the world who believe that physical, political, and economic might makes right. And when we look at that multitude shining in their white robes, it can be easy for us to forget that they too are human, that they sinned and made mistakes just as we do, that however glorious they are now, they were not perfect in their earthly lives. The saints were arrogant and cruel to those who loved them, and blind to the ways their good works allowed the injustice of their society to persist. The faithful departed were racist and sexist and refused to reconcile with their children and were too proud to ask for help. Sinners just like us, in other words. We must simultaneously emulate their good example and resist the urge to defend their wrongdoing, which is hard to do when we are told that people are either all good or all bad, rather than a mix of both. To use a current example, it's increasingly controversial to preach from Harry Potter because the author is engaging in extreme transphobia. And our society doesn't like holding in tension that she wrote both these lovable books and these hateful tweets. And yet that is how life is on earth. As Harry's experience with the resurrection stone demonstrated, for us humans, it's only in memory that a person's flaws can be erased by love. But John reminds us that the saints are washed in the blood of the Lamb. The mess of their deaths and the pain of their conflicts with the authorities and the foibles that kept them from doing all the good they might have done are all washed away, and the heavenly vision is nothing but love. Their love in praising God, and God's love in sheltering them, feeding them, and wiping the tears from their eyes. And on the feasts of all saints and all souls, it is to the perfected communion of saints that we look for hope as we strive in our imperfect ways to resist the evil actions of imperial power. In this dark and troubling present, when death stalks every human interaction, let us turn the resurrection stone of our memory that the present love of the saints and faithful departed may lend us the courage to keep putting one foot in front of the other.